So let's talk about an ego game that we might call the competition and comparison game. And this might sound, at first glance, relatively innocent. You might think about, we have competitions, like sporting competitions, where we are, have athletes going against each other, or they're trying to break a record and run faster than anybody else, and these kind of things. You have a lot of competition games of people trying to keep up with the Joneses, having a bigger house, a bigger car, this or that. And you might say, well, is that so bad? And no, but there are levels of these competition and comparison games, because the big question in terms of comparison games is, what are you comparing to? And so in order to really grasp this, let's just step back a little bit. I have a video where that's called How the World Was Created, where I talk about how the world was created. And in it I explain that we are designed to be co-creators with our Creator and with the Ascended Masters. So in other words, a group of Ascended Masters called the Elohim a long time ago created or manifested the Earth. And then groups of life streams, new life streams, were sent in to take embodiment on Earth. And these life streams are meant to co-create. They're meant to build on the foundation set by the Elohim and co-create. And there were first 3 groups of life streams that did this. They built onto the foundation and made the Earth more than it was created to be. But then there was a 4th group of life streams where many of those didn't make it to seeing themselves as co-creators. And therefore they went into the illusion that they were separate beings, and they used the duality consciousness to do this. So this means that the Earth has now been taken to a lower level than it was originally created at, which is why you see this, there's a shortage, there seems to be a shortage of natural resources, people have to struggle against nature, struggle against each other, and basically all the struggle that's going on is created by human beings going into separation. So, if you think about originally, here you have co-creators. What is the purpose of existence? It is actually to expand our sense of self. But we start, as I explained in the other video, we start in an unascended sphere. And the reason for this is that the unascended sphere, nothing has become permanent. It's kind of like a sandbox where we can play, we can build any sandcastle we can imagine. But we can't damage the sand. We can always, tear down the sandcastle and the sand goes back to its original state. That's basically how it is in the material universe, even though it can be difficult to see on a planet like Earth. But nothing has become permanent. This means we have complete freedom what we want to do with our free will. And the basic choice we have, of course, is, as I explained many times, we can see ourselves as separate beings, we can see ourselves as connected beings or as separate beings. So if we see ourselves as connected beings, we have a sense that we're connected to something outside our own minds and outside the environment we live in. And this is partly our higher selves, but it's also the Ascended Masters who are our spiritual teachers and guides. If we go into separation, however, we now lose that sense of connection. And as I've explained in many of my videos about non-duality, the way we go into separation is we go into this duality consciousness where there are always 2 opposite polarities. And what we do is we take some of these relative viewpoints that exist in duality and we elevate them to the status of being absolute. This is the absolute truth. Christianity is the only true religion, materialism is the only true philosophy, communism is the only true economic philosophy, and so forth. We create all these viewpoints, but it's not just the overall ideas. We even do it at the personal level, where we define ourselves as a separate being. And now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. This is part of what we can do with free will in an unascended sphere. So what we can compare this to is to say that the Earth is like a theater. I know I used this analogy before, but it's quite valuable. So there are all kinds of roles you can play in the theater of Earth, or the movie production of Earth. So you have some of these old movies that say cast of thousands. So you literally have a cast of millions in the movie production of Earth. And as you see in some of these big movies, there can be a battle scene with thousands of soldiers. And most of these soldiers, they're just dressed up in the costume, and they don't say anything. You don't even see them close up. They're just playing that part, a non-speaking part. They're extras, so to speak. And this is how we start out. You know, as a new being comes into embodiment on Earth, there are these predefined roles in any society or any time epoch. And we take on some of these roles and we play them for one lifetime, maybe several lifetimes. And what will naturally happen is that after we have played a role for a certain amount of time, we have a built-in drive to be more. It's just built into creation. That's why creation even got started, because even the creator had a desire to be more. And so there comes a point where we've had enough of playing a certain role, and we want more. We want more than the role. And this means in the natural scenario, we play a certain role. We can even go into the illusion of separation. And we play a certain role. After a while, we've had enough of it, and we just let it drop and take on another role. And after we have played all of the different roles that can be played on Earth, we might have had enough of playing these roles, and now we are ready to ascend. We're ready to experience more than the Earth can offer. So this is the natural scenario. But in terms of the competition and comparison games, we need to recognize, as I also explained in my video about how the world was created, that there's something called fallen beings. And at a certain point, they were allowed to embody on Earth. And since then, what they have done is, they have taken this, we might say, innocent ego game of comparison and competition, and they have perverted it. They have attempted to pervert it to make it a blind alley that's very difficult to get out of. And the reason they do this is we can say that one way to explain it is to say that there are two levels of ego. There's a sort of the innocent ego, and there's the not so innocent ego. And the innocent ego is one where, as I said, you take on a certain role. How do you take on a role in the theater production of Earth? Well, basically you are creating these subconscious selves that I've talked about in many of my videos. But these subconscious selves make up your ego, your sense of self. In other words, let's say you are born in medieval Europe. You are born in a peasant family. So you are essentially taking on this role that's predefined as a peasant. And that's all you can be in that lifetime, because there was no upward mobility in that society. So your ego is then really giving you the impression, this is who I am, and this is all I can be. But there can come a point, as I said, where you played that role enough that you're beginning to wonder, because of your built-in drive to be more, beginning to wonder, is this the only way I can be as a human being? Is this the only role I can play in this theater? And then you have this desire to be more. So this is what we can say, this is an ego game. And you can even say that in the innocent version of it, when you go into separation, you lose your sense of connection to something beyond your own mind. So what do? Well, your frame of reference now becomes Earth, what you experience around you. Before, your frame of reference was your higher self or the ascended masters. So look at the difference. Comparison games, right? When you see yourself as a connected being, what are you comparing yourself to? You're comparing yourself to your inner connection, to your higher self, to the ascended masters, to whatever you gain from that connection. You can get a sense that there is more. Because just the fact that you have a connection means there's more than what's here on Earth. So you may never be fully identified with the role you're playing on Earth, therefore it's easier to get out of it. Once you go into separation, you can't compare yourself to your higher self or to some directions from the Ascended Masters. So now you begin to compare yourself to other people. or to physical conditions on earth, or to some ideology created on earth. Now again, there's nothing wrong with it. This is what you are allowed to do with free will. You are allowed to experiment with the duality consciousness. In fact, all of us have to experiment with the duality consciousness so we get a feel for what it is, because if we don't know what it is, we can't choose to raise ourselves above it. So we have to experiment with this, and part of what we do in duality is we define our own roles. You know, there of course can be a society, as I said, in medieval Europe, there were predefined roles. But what we also do is we define these roles ourselves. And we are comparing ourselves to other people, the roles they have defined, to our society, whatever roles are defined there. So our frame of reference is now longer the higher self and the ascended masters. Our frame of reference is horizontal, something here on earth. So in a sense, we are comparing ourselves to other people, to ideas, but they are all man-made. They're all created here on earth. They're all created out of separation and duality. So what the Ascended Masters have explained, and which I explained in the other video as well, is there was a point where the earth was starting to go into a self-destructive spiral, and the Ascended Masters allowed the fallen beings to embody here. And what the fallen beings did was they took these ego games, comparison and competition games that had been developed by people on earth, and they perverted them. They gave them a twist. And the purpose of this was to make it more difficult to get out of them. And so here is, as I've also explained in several videos, we can talk about the duality consciousness at a certain, we can say, innocent level. And then there is the fallen consciousness, which takes duality to a different level where it's now based on denial. There's a certain denial where the fallen beings have decided they can't be wrong, and therefore they are denying anything that makes it seem like they could be wrong. So you see what I was just saying. You take on a role, you play that role until you've had enough of it, and then you say, okay, let me drop this role and play something else. But once you have that element of denial, the fallen beings are adding this idea that your role, playing this role, has some epic importance and significance. You are proving something by playing this role. And therefore, you can't just drop it. You can't just let it go, because that would be admitting you had done something wrong by playing the role. And you can't be wrong, so therefore you must continue to deny anything that would make it seem like you're wrong. And so you see what I'm saying here, in the natural scenario, you're just playing the role, and you come to a point where you realize, I've had enough of it, I drop it and play something else, right? You've had a non-speaking part in Hamlet for several lifetimes, and now you say, I want to have a speaking part. So eventually you work your way up to where now you're playing the title role. You're playing Hamlet. So you're the one who gets to say to be or not to be, which actually means to be more or not to be more or to continue playing the part. But see, here comes the fallen beings and say, no, it is epically important that you are Hamlet, and you cannot be anything other than Hamlet. Therefore, you must deny your natural tendency to want more and just continue playing this part. But they are not necessarily saying that you continue playing the part exactly as it is. No, you continue to make it more and more sophisticated. So in other words, you are being a more sophisticated Hamlet, but you're still being Hamlet, see. You're still within the parameters that the fallen beings have defined. You just seek to become more sophisticated, better at this than other people, wiser than other people, smarter than other people, more powerful than other people, richer than other people. You see what I'm saying? The natural tendency is that you come to a point where you want to be more than this role. But the fallen beings are trying to pervert it, so instead you are saying, I want to be more of this role, more powerful, richer, more wise, so forth and so on. And it becomes a black hole. It sucks all your energy into it, and it's very difficult to get out of it. And so you can actually see this in human affairs quite easily, where you can see that there are some people who have attained certain powerful positions in society, but it's never enough power. And you see, for example, I know I've talked about Hitler a lot, but it's because he's an obvious example. He wanted power, and he got all power in Germany. But that wasn't enough for him, so he had to try to conquer the world. And in trying to conquer the world, he, of course, self-destructed. And so this is what these competition games, you want more power than others, more money, more influence, more wisdom. You want to be looked up to, you want to be validated by other people. And it's never enough, it just sucks you in. You can go on almost indefinitely, you can't go on indefinitely, but you can go on for a very long time trying to get more and more of something here on earth, trying to live up to this standard that's created here on earth. But now take this to a slightly different level, because what the fallen beings have done also, and this is something, you could say these competition games where it's never enough, that's really what the fallen beings are trapped in. But most people on earth aren't trapped in that kind of a game, but they are still trapped in another version of this. And it is that the fallen beings created this standard that said, you are not good enough as you are. You are either flawed or you are lacking, or perhaps there's even something wrong with you, as you find in the Catholic doctrine of original sin. You were born into sin. You were born as a sinner. So you are an inherently flawed being. And now take the twist here. The fallen beings are projecting all beings, or all human beings are sinners. But God can't put everyone into hell. So if you do something that makes you seem like less than a sinner than other people, God will save you. So now we have all of these ideas that come up. For example, one religion is better than another religion. In essence, if you look at the religious scene as it's been outplayed for thousands of years on earth, it's a competition game where people are constantly comparing their religion to other religions. And you can see any number of religions out there that believe we have the only true religion and all the others are wrong. And it's really just a competition game where they have this idea that there's this angry and judgmental God up there who is looking down on us, and he thinks we are all flawed, but our group, because we have the only true religion, and because we are so good, we are following the scriptures, we are praying, we are going to church, we are confessing our sins, we are doing good works, we are better than others, and therefore God will have to save us and send the others to hell. But see, there is no angry and judgmental God up there. There's a creator who gave us free will, and who is just allowing our free will to outplay itself. And what does that mean? That means all of these competition games between religions, or even spiritual movements, they are attempting, really, what people are doing. They are attempting to control God. They are attempting to influence God. Save us, not those other people. Choose us. We are the chosen people. But all of this, what humankind are doing, has no influence on God or the spiritual realm whatsoever. Because it's just roles in the play. And what the fallen beings are projecting, because this is what some of them actually believe themselves, is that, no, it's not just a play, it's real. The play is defined by God. And if we eventually perfect this part, if we make the best Hamlet that could ever be made, God will have to let that Hamlet into heaven. But God has said, this is a theater, this is an unascended sphere. You can create any role you want and play any role you want for as long as you want. But none of the roles you create on earth will ever make it to heaven. What can make it to the spiritual realm? Us, as the real beings you are, the conscious you, as I've explained in many videos. But how do we make it? Jesus said it 2,000 years ago. He said, only the man who descended from heaven can ascend back to heaven. And what descended from heaven was the conscious you in its pure, neutral form. The conscious you is an extension of the I Am Presence. And when it first descended, it wasn't playing any roles. And that's why I explained in many videos, the conscious you can step outside of any role we are playing. And it's only when the conscious you frees itself from all roles that you can ascend back to heaven. So what's the point in taking on the roles? It is that we expand our sense of self by playing a role. But be careful now. It isn't just playing the role. It's also coming to the point where we realize we are more than the role. We took on the role, but we are not defined by the role. That's how we really grow and expand our sense of self. In other words, I played this role, I went into it, I thought this was who I am and this is all I can be, but now I realize I'm more. And therefore you raise your sense of self by realizing you're more than the role. And so, you see what I'm trying to say? All of these competition and comparison games, this is something that happens here on Earth in an unascended sphere, even on an unnatural planet, as I've explained in my Avatar series. It has no influence on the spiritual realm whatsoever. The roles have no epic importance. They're just the outplaying of free will. And so I know that when you talk about competition, people will talk about sporting events. You're trying to run the 100-yard dash faster than anybody else. Or there is competition between nations. Who has the most power? Who has the biggest military? Or there's competition about people who is the richest, who has the biggest yacht or the biggest palace or whatever. And when you talk about comparison, most people are comparing themselves to other people. And you can look at some of these comparison games where people are comparing themselves based on how much money they have or how much power they have or whatever. And you can see that most spiritual people are beyond this. You know, most of the thousands of spiritual people I met over the past 48 years, they're beyond these outer competition games. You know, their whole lives aren't sucked into running faster or throwing a spear longer than anybody else, or being richer than anybody else. They're not trapped in this. And this is because the reason why we're spiritual is that in past lives we came to see that we are more than this. We came to this realization, we are more than this. We don't want to be trapped in these roles anymore. We want something beyond these predefined roles here on earth. That's why we're spiritual. But see, the fallen beings, of course, would have preferred that we hadn't come to that point, that we hadn't discovered it as a spiritual path. But even so, it doesn't mean they give up, because they have another avenue, another blind alley they can create. And you see many spiritual people in it. I was in it myself for many years after I first found the path. And it's actually the competition game between spiritual movements, even spiritual gurus. And I said earlier, you can find a number of religions that claim they have the only true religion. But you can also go out and find spiritual movements that claim, oh, we are the only true spiritual movement. We are the ones who are going to take the world into the golden age. We have the highest spiritual teaching. We have the most evolved guru. Our guru is more enlightened than those other gurus. And you know, I'm not trying to criticize this in the sense that I'm saying this is all wrong. I think it's just a phase. You know, I was in it for some time, and then eventually I evolved out of it, and I've seen many other people do the same. So the reason why I'm bringing it up is that for people who haven't yet made it out of it, there comes a point where you just have to look at this. And you have to look at it and say, okay, what is it that's going to bring a new era on Earth? Most spiritual people believe that there is a potential we can bring a new and better age. And I agree with that. This is not really an ego game, even though for some people it is an ego game, because they think it has to be done their way. And so they look at this, and it's true that we have the potential to take the Earth to a higher level as spiritual people. But how are we going to do this? Well, the fallen beings want to get us into the blind alley where we think by converting everybody else to follow our movement, to be members of our movement, to follow our teachings, to obey our guru. That's how we'll change the Earth. And that's not how it's going to happen. It's going to happen by a kind of whole range of universal spiritual ideas that are simply going to start coming forward. And you can see it happening since the 1960s. There are many spiritual ideas that have gradually worked their way into the thought process of the general population. I mean, one obvious example is karma. You know, in the 1970s, when I first found the spiritual path, karma was something that wasn't even talked about in the West. You would never hear anybody use that word. Now you can hear it in movies. Oh, that's bad karma, or karma is a bitch. And I'm not trying to say that people have a sophisticated understanding of it, but still the idea has somehow worked its way into people's minds. And that's what I'm saying. What will change the Earth is that there's a set of universal ideas that gradually become accepted by more and more people. And these ideas are beyond any specific movement, guru, or teaching. So the spiritual people who will help change the Earth the most are the ones who can transcend this competition game between who is the most evolved guru. You know, where this just drops away, it doesn't matter. What matters is that many people, many gurus, many teachers are seeking to raise consciousness. And the fallen beings, of course, are seeking to prevent this by keeping us trapped in this comparison where we say, oh, but here is an absolutely true idea, and anybody who doesn't recognize that idea is a false guru. And therefore, we have to prove them wrong. And this is an aspect of these competition games, you know, where in a sense you could say that even if you see yourself as a connected being, you can be in a certain competition mode where you're trying to do better, but you are really comparing yourself to an inner standard you have as a result of your connection to your higher being. And you can say there can be as a phase where you're comparing yourself to others. Am I more spiritual than them, or am I not doing what they are doing that is selfish and self-centered? But it's not by putting other people down. You're seeking to raise yourself up. You're seeking to transcend yourself. When you go into duality and separation, you are not just seeking to raise yourself up. You are seeking to raise yourself up to be better than others, which means you are trying to put them down. You are both seeking to raise yourself and to put other people down by, for example, proving them wrong, proving their spiritual ideas and teachings wrong. And so, you know, as spiritual people, we can say, well, I've already transcended the more obvious competition games. Yes, but have we transcended the competition of who has the only true teaching? Because there isn't necessarily just one true teaching. People are at different levels of consciousness, come from different cultural backgrounds, and they might need different teachings. What the Ascended Masters are doing, they're the universal spiritual teachers for humankind. They are not trying to get all people to acknowledge one specific movement or one specific teaching. They are seeking to meet different groups of people wherever they're at and give them something that helps them go higher. So therefore, there can be many ideas that are valid because they're all seeking to raise people's consciousness. But if you use the linear, competitive mindset, you can say, oh, here's a contradiction or an inconsistency between two spiritual teachings. And they can't both be right, so one of them must be wrong and the other is right. But this is the comparison mindset, the comparison game. Because there can very well be teachings, two teachings that are both valid in terms of helping to raise people's consciousness. But there could be some inconsistencies between the teachings because they are geared towards people from different backgrounds that have different beliefs. And they need different things in order to rise. So you can't be that competitive and comparative. Now, of course, I'm not saying that this means all teachings are valid, because there are some teachings that are deliberately given by the fallen beings to make it very difficult for people to raise higher, especially to get out of this whole standard of playing these roles here on earth. And one of them is, for example, the concept of original sin. I mean, that's not a valid idea that's given from the ascended realm to help people raise their consciousness. It's an idea that comes from the fallen beings and the fallen consciousness. And there are, of course, other ideas like that. But nevertheless, what I'm saying is, as spiritual people, we have to be careful we don't go into this comparison game where we think that the only way to change the earth is to convert all people to one spiritual teaching. It's really a matter of spreading universal spiritual ideas so that people come to see and accept this. And that is what will change the world. It's also what will help us grow, because of course, as individuals, as spiritual people, as long as we are trapped in this mindset of comparing our spiritual teaching to others and seeking to prove them wrong, we're not ready to ascend. Why not? Because comparing yourself to others is a role you're playing. You are trying to play the role that make yourself seem superior compared to others. And here's how free will works. As long as there's a certain role that you have taken on, and you haven't had enough of it, you're allowed to continue to play it indefinitely, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So if you look at yourself in this lifetime, and if you can see that, oh yeah, I do have a tendency to play this role and to want to prove other people's spiritual teachings wrong or put them down or prove my own superior, you can realize if you haven't had enough of the role, you're going to have to reincarnate. And you're going to have to continue playing that role until you come to that point where you look at the role and you decide, I want more than this. I want more than these roles that can be played on earth. That's when you're ready to ascend.